What up, meatheads? This is Travis, American Butcher, and this is the Meat Block Podcast. The weekly podcast brought to you, yes, every week, without fail, from the Pacific Northwest. This is episode 93. We're creeping up on 100. I don't know what we're going to do for our 100th episode. Spectacular? Probably not too much. And if you're new to the podcast, well, I just want to say welcome. And if you don't know what this podcast is, it is the weekly podcast by butchers for everyone. And I encourage you to go back and listen to previous episodes because, well, they are they're just amazing. Ugh. There comes that stutter. Awesome. Each episode stands on its own. We pick a topic, we discuss it in detail. This week we're going to be talking about brisket, breast meat from all animals. And the only thing serialized on this show is my personal anecdotes about my life. And if you've been paying attention or listening to me for the last few months, you know that I'm moving, or I moved. And right now I'm coming to you from the beach here on what do you call it? Well, it's the reservation, but I wanted to, on my sovereign nation. Coming to you from Tulalip. This is the Meat Block Podcast.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
Slow and low. Slow and steady wins the race. Guess it's all about pace. Today, we're talking about brisket. That's quality sound engineering brought to you here from the Meat Block. I got my gorilla rig set up right now. You know, not the full studio because I'm not 100% unpacked. So, excuse me if you hear little talents walking around as my dog walks on hardwood. It's our first time having it. And currently my studio is in the dining room and not in another location. Beef, lamb, and pigs don't have collarbones. Most quadrupeds don't. Quad meaning, four-legged animals that walk on pads. So quadrupeds. So their scapula is floating, essentially, over muscle. What is helping that movement is their chest muscles of walking. Just sit there and wiggle your shoulders back and notice your pectorals. Do your little dance in the mirror and whatnot. And on quadrupeds, this holds about 60% of their weight. So 60% of its weight is going through that pectoral meat, that brisket, if you will. And this is a working muscle. Other working muscles are the rounds and the shanks and the legs. These are muscles that are constantly being moved, helping stay balanced and versus, the loin, the tenderloin and things like that are motionless. Those are non-working muscles. So where the muscle fibers seem to be smaller and looser, allowing it to be more tender versus the brisket and the rounds, especially the gooseneck, where they're thicker muscle fibers and tighter together. They're not loose, therefore making it tough. So you have essentially this very tough, meaty, and with a nice fat cap piece of meat. And as far as the cuts you could get really with it in America, you could get a Packers brisket, which is no trimming. It's just pulled off the forequarter and put into a box and then later go to a retailer. And then that retailer may put it in the case like that after doing minimal trimming and, with the fat and moving the fat on the backside. Or he may cut it in half and give you a point end and a flat end. And then other countries like, Australia, their whole brisket is the point end is what we consider briskets in America, but a whole brisket also has the navel attached to it. Which has different muscle structure But you could also cook it the same with that slow and low, just maintaining a consistent pace until you're ready. It's ready. Now, I just want to go around the world and and talk about different cooking techniques of the brisket with different cultures, because you could travel the world and travel many cultures just through your palate alone. And if you live in a city that offers a multitude of dining experiences, then I would encourage you to step out of your element when, going someplace and being like, oh, what's this mussel that you use for this dish? So we're going to talk about the brisket around the world. In Hong Kong, it's cooked with spices over low heat until tender, and is commonly served with noodles in a soup or curry. In Korea, it is first boiled at a low temperature with aromatic vegetables. Aromatics being your onions, your garlic. They may just, have mirepoix in there as well. And then they're cooking it at this low temperature with these vegetables. And then it is pressed with a heavy object and is put in a container with the weight. And the container is filled with soy sauce, a soy sauce based marinade. And then the brisket is cut into matchstick size pieces. So like really small, really thin pieces. And I'm going to mess this up, but this is called John Genorman. Yep. Brisket is also the main ingredient in a spicy soup called Yukkunjang. It's part of a class soup served that are complementary with a lot of Korean meals. And then, of course, it is sliced thin and cooked over a hot plate, such as Korean barbecue. Oh, I love Korean barbecue. I love putting little strips on and all that stuff and all the condiments they give you and the experience and having some, tiger beers. It's a big, it's fun to do with a group of people, a community. Milo, shut up. My recording studio, like I said, is in the dining room, and that's where my dog's food is. So that's what you hear, him walking around and drinking water. In New Zealand, it is used in a boil-up, boiled in seasoned water with green vegetables and potatoes. It is a popular dish among Maori people. It is also a common cut of meat used in the Vietnamese soup known as pho. In Britain, it's not genuinely smoked, but it is one of a number of low-cost cuts normally cooked very slowly. That's slow and steady. And lidded like a crock pot dish with gravy. That sounds good. Like a Swiss steak cooked with gravy. In Italy, particularly northern Italy, it's called a boil istomo mistio, which literally translates to mixed boil. In parts of India and Pakistan, it is a nehari, Nehari, and it is just a slow cut of meat. They also use shank for this dish as well, along with bone marrow. The Germans sometimes cook it in dark German beer with celery, carrots, onions, and bay leaves in a small bundle at a time. So we're going to talk about smoking in this episode. I just wanted to give you an overview of other parts of the world. If you're here in America, you most likely have had corned beef, which is mostly brisket. And that stems from Ireland, I think. And then also, if you ever grew up in a kosher household, a lot of times that the meat that they're going to use is going to be from the forequarter. Well, it is going to be from the forequarter if they're actually kosher. And a lot of roasting cuts, you really only get one roasting cut from the forequarter, and that's brisket. and you're going to braise it like a pot roast. And it's going to be something you serve on a holiday, such as a Rosh Hashanah, Passover, or the Sabbath. And I've been to Seder dinners, and they're great. And, you have your lamb bones, you have your nice brisket, and you have some good manischewitz. I don't know if that's a thing, but you certainly have manischewitz, which I don't recommend getting drunk off if it's so sweet. And another popular cooking technique that comes from the Jewish community with brisket is pastrami. Pastrami on rye, with some mustard. So good.
The smell first hits me from 5 blocks away. It's Friday and I can't stay away. The Blue Jays are playing, but I won't likely risk it. I'm here with a plan to binge on her brisket.
Hey, meatheads, David here. Have to excuse my external noise. I'm not in my usual recording space. I'm sitting in an empty cabin in California right now. It's super, super windy outside, and you can kind of hear it in the background. That's neither here nor there. I'm here to talk to you about brisket today. It reminds me of my very first food service job. After I left the dish pit, of course, I was promoted up to a position called Smokehouse Prep Cook. This was in a popular health food retailer in Chicago. We were the flagship store, so naturally we had all the best equipment, the most over-the-top experience for customers. It's kind of a circus, really. Our prepared foods area had it all. We had a diner with beers on tap and a surly short-order cook. The cook couldn't smoke, but they may as well have been smoking right on the grill. We had a taqueria. We had a wood-fired pizza oven. We had a deli that sliced meats to order. We had meats on spits that went into sandwiches. We had a chicken rotisserie that pumped out fresh wogs every 90 minutes or so. And then we had a smokehouse. It was pretty great. The smokehouse in this grocery store served all the usual suspects, mac and cheese, both Kansas City and Carolina barbecue sauce, loaded baked potatoes, corn salad, coleslaw, wings, smoked turkey breast, smoked pulled pork, smoked pulled chicken, hot links, spare ribs, back ribs, brisket, and burnt ends. We cooked all these meats in a double-door Southern Pride smoker. I think it was the SPK 700 model, if anybody out there knows Southern Pride smokers. Wood-fired, digitally programmable, is a beautiful thing. Every night it was loaded up with whole Decalon briskets, probably 8 to 10 of those. No, maybe 12 to 16 of those, actually. Another dozen pork butts. Those were loaded a few hours later, obviously. They'd smoke overnight. My job was to show up for the 5 a.m. shift, unload the smoker, taste everything. But that wasn't really part of my job. I just tasted everything. And then you'd reload it with the short cook time items for lunch service, the wings, the ribs, the chicken, the turkey, all that stuff. And the real delicacy was when you unloaded the smoker, we'd cut the decal off, chop the hell out of it with a bench scraper. No, wait. We'd cut the decal off, we'd put it back in the smoker with the short cook items. We'd re-smoke it for another 4 or 5 hours, take that out, then chop the hell out of it with a bench scraper, mix it up with sauce, and sell it as burnt ends for sandwiches. Unreal. I mean, it was one of the most decadent, filthy, fatty, sweet, succulent things ever. And honestly, I would definitely consider it as an item on my death row last meal. Right next to the jar of peanut butter and the gallon of whole milk. It was a really cool job. I learned a lot about time management, learned a lot about multitasking. Everything that I made was 20 or more gallons, so we had these giant tilt skillets. And for those of you that don't know what a tilt skillet is, it's a humongous frying pan, generally square in dimension, and you could cook, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 gallons of items in it. It had its, obviously its own heat source, and then when you were finished, it had a hand crank system that allowed you to tilt it down and kind of use a giant oar-sized spatula to get these items out into 5 to 8 gallon Cambros at a time. And so that was how I made the mac and cheese. I'd always make 20, 30 gallons of barbecue sauce at a time, buffalo wing sauce, mashed potatoes. I mean, whatever it was, it was really a sight to behold. But we went through it. We went through a shit ton of it every day because it was good, But the majority of my time was spent in the morning tending to the meat and to the smoker. And brisket was our biggest seller. This is where I developed my love for it. I'd eat the bird end sandwiches until I went blind if I had a choice back then. Since then, I've realized that the product that we made at that grocery retailer, though, was paltry in comparison to some of the greats. Franklin down in Austin, I've been there, and that brisket was a religious experience. Southern Kitchen in Tacoma, Washington, if anybody's been there, aside from myself and Guy Fieri, it's worth making a trip to Washington for. It's unbelievable food. Slows in Detroit, they've got some really great barbecue. Everybody has their favorite barbecue pit they go to. It serves a brisket sandwich or just a brisket plate. It's as American as apple pie. And honestly, it definitely steals the pectoral muscle show, as far as mammal meat goes. But what about pork brisket or pork cushion? Or what about lamb or veal breast? Those are things that in any butcher shop I've worked in, unless they're being utilized as a conversation starter in the case, which they usually are, and they're harder than hell to sell, they go straight to the grind, Over time, in a couple of artisanal shops that I worked, kind of spent some time trying to re-merchandise these items. You don't always need another 2 to 4 pounds of pork rind. You don't always need that super fatty meat sent into your lamb or veal grind. And, if you send the whole breast in, it's going to change your fat content and not give you the same product. So we found some ways to add some value to it. And as you all know, value added is it's my jam, and I love working on it and being creative with it. And you also know that I feel very strongly that Americans want value-added products. They want oven-ready things. They want things they don't have to prepare at home right now. So I've got a couple recipes I want to share with you. The first of which is for pork breast, pork cushion, pork brisket, pork pectoral, whatever you want to call it. It's a braised dish. This is a tough meat. It's not something that you really want to roast quickly or pan sear. This is something you want to cook nice and low, nice and slow. Go with that cliche. And we're all used to braising red meats in wine and stock, and that's sort of a traditional thing. But this recipe comes from my background in Italian cooking when I was working in Seattle. It comes from a northern Italian recipe, and it's milk braised pork. Now, if you haven't ever braised anything in milk, it's really something. The milk solids tend to curdle as you cook it, which we're all taught that we don't want broken sauces, but in this case, it's really what you want, and it allows. So when the milk solids curdle, it allows those milk solids to caramelize if you cook it at the right temperature and get a really nice nutty flavor. For those of us who've ever had Yetus cheese, it's kind of that's the flavor that comes through in that cheese. It's the caramelized milk solids. It's really, really special. And so when you braise in this, that's what you get. You get this really robust, nutty, earthy, kind of sweet, kind of funky flavor. And it really goes super well with pork. And it goes well with beef too, but it's really great with pork. So here's how it works. If you're going to break down your shoulder, split the whole shoulder. I like to say 2 fingers off of the ridge bone, off of the neck bone in the shoulder, so that you're cutting obviously parallel to the length of the body of the hog. So you're splitting the Boston butt from the picnic. Take the arm roast off, and then you're left with the breast or the cushion or the brisket, however you want to call it. Take that meat off the bone, and hug the copa ribs super tight, so that you just get all of that meat and all of that fat. And the first thing I'm going to do is make a basic brine. Now, we've talked recently about brines that are based on the water weight in the meat, Paul Bertoli's method. We're not going to start with that. This is just a super simple overnight brine. This is how I wing it. This is just how I do all my meat when I know I'm going to have something the next day, or even in like 8 hours. This is what I do. So half a cup of salt, half a cup of brown sugar, 10 cups of water, cold water, hot water, whatever you want to do, just something warm enough to dissolve the salt and the sugar. And that's a 5% salinity brine. I think that works super well for me. You can go up to 10% if you want, just depending on what you're after. In this case, with the pork, I like to have something that's a little bit sweet, a little bit salty, and then let my sauce kind of bring the rest of my seasoning in. So just go with that 5% solution here. So half cup salt, half cup brown sugar, dissolved in some warm, maybe cool water, whatever you can make work. And then just make sure that the brine is cool to the touch when you pour it over the meat. So grab your pork cushion, throw it in your brine, throw it in the fridge overnight. You can gather up your ingredients for the next day just so you're ready to go. And so your ingredients are as follows. You're going to need, I don't know, a half stick of butter, maybe a whole stick. I'm pretty liberal with the butter, really. If you've ever seen me, that's not a shock. You need salt, you need black pepper, you need a little bit of white pepper if you have it. Take 1 to 2 quarts of whole milk. You just really need enough to make sure that the meat's submerged 2/3 of the way. So it just depends. If you've got 2 pork cushions, you're going to go 2 quarts. If you just got 1, you're just cooking for yourself and another person. Just a quart of milk's good. 2 cups of pork stock. I like it to be something that's been reduced and really gelatinous, something really, really punchy, And ultimately there, you could just use water, but with the cook time that's going to be involved, I like to just give yourself a little bit of leeway for reduction so that you don't over-reduce your sauce. Next, 1 lemon. And then I like to do like a bouquet. Sage, thyme, rosemary, bay. Those are all really important. One or 2 pods of star anise. Not the full star, but just like one of the little nubs. So we'll call it 1 nub of star anise. If you don't have all those herbs, that's great. I would say in order of importance, I would start with rosemary, then sage, then thyme, and you got to use bay. You got to have the bay in there. If you have any dehydrated orange zest, that comes in handy here, but it's not necessary. It's just a nice little addition. In addition to that, you'll need 3 large leeks, or 5 shallots, or 2 large red onions. It doesn't matter which. That's the order in which the flavors go the best with this dish. I really suggest leeks. Next, 4 to 6 cloves of garlic, depending on how large they are. If they're the German extra hearty variety and they're just huge cloves, just do 4. If they're your standard grocery store, the size of half of your thumb cloves, get 6 of them. And then I like to, lastly, I like to do turnips or daikon radish, just for that little bit of horseradish flavor. I really like that in the braise. So what you're going to do is you're going to take half of that stick of butter, throw it in your skillet. You've removed your pork from the fridge and let it warm up to room temp about an hour ago. So that's just been resting on a plate, kind of drying out, kind of getting warmed up a little bit. At this point, you've got your butter going. It's starting to bubble. It's starting to get real hot. It's not quite browned yet. And then you're going to throw your pork into that skillet. Once you got it browned on all sides, you'll remove that. If your butter has burned, pour that out into your oil dump. If it is just browned and nice and caramely, then that's great. That's what you want. So from there, I would throw my herbs in, throw the leeks in, throw the turnips or the radish in, and start to cook those just a little bit. Get those so they're really aromatic, so you can really smell those flavors. You got the garlic going in there as well. You want it just to smell great, and everything's not quite start to brown, but start to cook a little bit. Once you get that going, you're going to deglaze with the pork stock. Scrape up all the bits, all the fond on the bottom of the skillet. Then you're going to add your milk. Bring that to just, not even a simmer, just get it really incorporated and hot. Throw it in your roasting pan. If you're doing all this in a cast iron skillet, it's perfect. Just throw your pork in, cover it with foil, cover it with a lid, throw it in the oven. Your oven's been preheated at this point I like 220. You could even do 210. 210 is best because you're not quite at a boil. If it goes as low as 200 or 205, that's great. And it's going to take a while, at that low temperature. Some people like to do it up at 250, 275, but I think that the milk caramelizes too quickly and you get too hard of a curdle. And so I like to do that kind of at that lower temperature for a longer time. So the one pork brisket or pork cushion may take you 4 to 6 hours to get super tender, but it's totally worth it. So just kind of check on it after the 3-hour mark and see where it's at. Your sauce will have started to reduce. It will have broken. It will get curdled. And when you check on it after that 3-hour mark, that's when you want to add. That's when you want to add the lemon. So the lemon you will have juiced and set the juice aside. Okay, you're going to use that for something else. You're really trying to get the oils from the skin. So you're going to throw your quartered lemon in the braise at this point and leave it in there for the remainder of the cooking time until it's finished. Once you take it out and you're like, holy shit, this is tender, this is really perfect, remove the meat, set it aside onto a plate. Okay. If your rosemary, thyme, sage, any of those things, if those are all on the stem still, remove those. If it's just leaves or if it was just dried items, you can leave that. You want to remove your star anise pod if you can find it. Sometimes when you're using a bouquet like this, I suggest wrapping it all up in cheesecloth and tying it with a piece of butcher's twine and then tying the end of the butcher's twine to the handle of your pot so that you can just kind of retrieve the whole bouquet at once and toss it. At this point, you're going to take whatever's left of the braising liquid. There should be a little bit, if it's really reduced down, add a little bit more stock or a little bit more milk to that and bring it up to a simmer on the stove so you can kind of get all that fond off the bottom of the pan again and get everything incorporated. From there, you're going to throw it into a bowl, and if you've got you can either throw everything into a food processor, into your Vita Prep, your NutriBullet, or if you've got an immersion blender, blend it all up. All the solids, all the radish, everything that's in that braising liquid, blend that into a sauce, taste it. It should be really savory, really herby, super rich. Salt and pepper to taste with the white pepper. And that's going to be your pan sauce, but it's also going to be what you're going to dip your large chunks of bread in just to soak up. So, when you plate that, you could plate it with some polenta. You could plate that over just a pan of roasted root vegetables. Put your pork breast, brisket, cushion on top. Have your pan sauce. Honestly, I just keep that sauce on the side in like a cup so that I can either dip my bread in it or I can pour it or like dip everything else in it. I'm a dipper. Anyways, that's a really great recipe. Give her a try. I think you'll like it. And I've got one for lamb belly too. Well, it's not really lamb belly, lamb breast rather. We historically we try to stuff that. Always be like spinach, feta, olives, whatever it was, something Mediterranean generally. We take that lamb breast, which would include everything. If it was a beef or a veal, it would be the brisket, right down through the first part of the navel. The stuffed things, it's kind of a mixed bag because when you roast that whole stuffed breast, you lay it out on your block, you fill it with your fillings, you tie it up like a roast, and then you sell the whole thing. You can square up the ends, you can get the nice cross section. The customer can see everything that's it's filled with. The reality is though, when you roast it, it's okay. It doesn't take on a ton of flavor. It a lot of times the ingredients will leak out. It's just not ever as as beautiful finished as it is in the case. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. Skirt steak roulade or pinwheels or whatever, they're the same way. But what we started doing is selling lamb belly bacon. We do it smoked and unsmoked. I prefer the unsmoked. And what we did is we took the lamb breast, or the veal breast, depending on what it was, took it off the bone, and then just added that rub that I've shared with you in the past. It's 3.25% salt, 2.75 to 3% brown sugar, and black pepper. Rub that all over the belly. Don't leave any behind. Vac pack it at 97% vacuum. Let it sit for a good week. Take it out. Rinse it. And what I do is I tie this up like a pancetta and square up the ends. Partially freeze it. And then cut it into your medallions. And it's absolutely delicious. And you can pre-smoke it. I prefer it unsmoked. But if you were to merchandise that, what you'd do is you'd cut your medallions onto like a wax paper and display them really nicely, and then sell them as a layer of 6 or 8 slices at a time or something like that, or you could slice it to order. It's just really hard to slice to order if it's not partially frozen. So these are just a couple ideas I had for some alternative uses for other animals: briskets, breasts, cushions, whatever. I hope you guys try it. I hope you like them, and let us know what you think.
Over a year ago, in the infancy of this podcast, I had the pleasure of interviewing Jess Prowse, Sultan of Barbecue, the female Ron Swanson, the barbecue queen, author, barbecue aficionado, Jess Prowse, author of the book Hardcore Carnivore, which I truly recommend. Also recommend you check her out on all the social meets. And she makes a dark rub for red meat. It's a charcoal-based rub, and it is fucking delicious. And on that episode, I encourage you to go back and find it and listen to it, because the whole thing is good. But I asked her, how would you cook a brisket? And I'm just going to sum that up. This beef brisket, of course, David talked about a bunch of other things, but I'm bringing it back to beef. I'm bringing it back to the traditional American smoked brisket. With all meat, before you're cooking, you're going to want to let it rest for a while, get up to room temperature. And with a piece of brisket, it may take a while. Maybe take it, because it's so big in the core temperature, it will take a long time. So I just take it at like half hour before you're going to smoke it, right before you put it in the smoker. Just cover it in this rub, the Hardcore Carnival Black Rub. And yes, this is a shameless promotion that I'm getting nothing out of. This is flash marketing. But go out and get it. I get no kickbacks. I'm not affiliated with this other than the sense that we are friends. So this is what I use every time I smoke a brisket, which I do often. I enjoy smoking brisket. It is delicious. So for the first 2 hours, and have my smoker hovering around, 225, 250, somewhere in between there. My chips, of course, have been soaking for about a half hour at this time. And this is going off of like your traditional home smoker. The ones I use at work hold about 1,000 pounds of meat. And I'm only talking about, what you would have in the average person's backyard. Average. Not you, the person listening to this, who's like, oh yeah, something super crazy in my backyard. If you do, then you don't need to listen to this, because you probably know very well what you're doing. So you got your smoker pre-seasoned, you got your wood chips smoking, you got your brisket rubbed. You're going to place it in tin foil, 2 layers, pinch the sides tight around the edges. And it's in a tin foil boat. It's not covering the top of it. Then you're going to place that in your smoker. Let it go for about 2 hours. After 2 hours, take a piece of tin foil, cover the top of it, cinch it down tight, like watertight. Do 2 more hours at that previous mentioned temperature. Once again, between 225 and 250 of the internal temperature of the smoker. And the second 2 hours is going to make those juices just marinate and cook within the meat, keeping all the moisture in. last 2 hours, and yes, right now we're on a 6-hour smoke. You're going to uncover it, maybe crank the heat up a little bit if your internal temperature is pretty far off. And we've trapped all that moisture in there because the 2 hours off essentially was like searing it in the beginning, and then the 2 hours covered is trapping all the moisture in. And now we're working on that bark with the last 2 hours to get that crunch, to get that, you know, when some people say it's burnt, but it's not burnt, baby. It's so good. You know, internal temperature of 190 is going to give you a nice, tender, moist brisket. When you go up to about 212, that's when you start able to just pull this thing apart at the muscle fibers. So it's up to you when you want to pull it. Do you want to slice it for sandwiches, or do you want to pull it for like a slider type dish? But before you touch knife to fork to this, what I'd recommend is letting it rest. Double wrap it in tin foil. Jess recommends get some beach towels, hold it in there, then put it in a cooler for about 2 hours. And this resting is ensuring that those juices just don't immediately run out when you cut it. Like your Thanksgiving turkey, when you're going to let it rest before you cut into it. Any big piece of meat, you should let rest. This 2 hour period, you could have more beers. Oh, Milo, what are you doing? This 2 hour period, you could have more beers, socialize with your guests because you're obviously not going to be eating a whole brisket by yourself, and have the opportunity to prepare your sides, set your table, and get ready for an amazing dining experience. Milo's really thirsty today, so I'll have some too. Now, the smoke ring. Smoke ring is not indicative to whether or not you cooked it properly. It has to do more with the purities of the wood and the nitrates in the wood. Or phosphates, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. You'd certainly cheat a smoke ring by just rubbing it real quick with, 0.05% or 0.025% of sodium nitrate, and that will also give you a nice pink ring if that's what you're going for. But if you cut into it and you don't have a smoke ring, it doesn't mean you did it wrong. Just know that.
So moist and tender, always sends me on another Shabbos bender.
The beef brisket cut is comprised of the chest muscles. The bench press muscles, another way to think of it, the pectoral muscles. So bench press, being a weightlifting exercise, is going to be chest dominant movement. It involves many other accessory muscles, rotator cuff for stability, deltoids, triceps heavily get used, but the chest will far and away create the best bench pressers depending on how strong of a chest they have. Cattle need to support their weight on their front feet at all times, not only just through standing there, but also through ambulation, through movement. And these chest muscles are going to support the majority of the weight of the animal at any given moment. All that weight is going to kind of come over the forelegs. So the pectoral muscles are working hard throughout the whole life of that animal. A lot of fat, a lot of sinew, a lot of tough muscle, working muscle characteristics are present in the brisket. Sometimes as butchers, we may decide to separate these two muscles at the seam, the deep pectoral and the superficial pectoral, thereby dividing them into a seamed point cut and a seamed flat cut. Other times, more commonly from what I've seen, we may decide to make a straight cut to divide the point and flat, creating a uniform and geometrically shaped version of the brisket. Each brisket cooking technique will inevitably require a variation in how we decide to cut it at the cutting block. More fat, less fat, divided or whole, heavily trimmed or lightly trimmed. Working with small farmers, I see quite a variety of briskets in their muscle size and the texture of their fat and the amount of fat and the color of their fat, and it just goes on and on. Each one looks so different, so unique. That's the benefit of working with different breeds of animals, different genetics that have had a different life experience based on different husbandry practices. You get a lot of variety, spectrum. Beef brisket. The beef brisket cut is a good example of how one piece of the animal, one cut, can be interpreted in various ways by communities, many communities, and cooking traditions worldwide. The brisket is adored as the most decadent prized cut within some communities during certain times of the year, and many layers of cultural and spiritual significance can become imbued with it. While to other communities and populations, it receives very little mention or very little attention at all. I'll get back to the specifics or some few specifics related to the brisket cut in a moment, but for those of you who know me, you'll be aware that this kind of dovetails into one of my favorite subjects. So let me go down that rabbit hole for a second here. One of my favorite subjects related to meat cuts and cookery has to do with the phenomenon of cultural and regional favorite cuts. A certain cut of meat, be it from beef, pork, lamb, goat, etc., that for whatever reason, usually a variety of reasons, becomes a very meaningful thing, culturally and historically, for a certain group of people. This is fascinating to me, how this might happen, and just the fact that it does happen. A cut of meat that receives very little attention in one culture in one part of the world can take on a heightened significance, become a focal point for special occasions and holidays in another culture in another part of the world. This subject is interesting to me for two main reasons. One, because I take great comfort in the fact that different human cultures can come to markedly different conclusions about what is valuable. That is the benefit of stepping outside of the culture of one's own upbringing, stepping beyond one's own family culture and regional cultural norms, and pursuing meaningful interaction with people who possess a different kind of worldview. This kind of pursuit is admirable in that it fosters an open-mindedness and a camaraderie based on our common humanity, and helps us break out of an us and them, us versus them, sectarian kind of mindset. So I love this. I love the fact that there are so many different cultural worldviews and regional and local kind of worldviews. I love that variety and that spectrum of cultural norms, but I also love the motivation to step outside of it and begin to connect with the larger human race at a humanity level, which can only happen when we pursue meaningful interaction with other communities and other worldviews and learn about other worldviews, etc. The second main reason the subject of culturally significant cuts is compelling to me is because when I see human populations bringing all of their creativity to a subject, and more than that, when humans bring all of their excitement and their focus and their hard work and their devotedness to a subject, I'm reminded of humanity at our best. It makes me hopeful, gives me hope, especially when the activity contains an intentionality that showcases some of our more virtuous human traits. There's so much, pettiness in the world and selfishness that when I see the intentionality and the creativity that showcases some of our more virtuous human traits, I'm inspired and I'm given hope. Food traditions often bring people together, and at their best, they can be a good medium to showcase qualities of generosity, qualities of community building, qualities of cultural preservation, environmental stewardship, etc. These kinds of family and regional favorite recipes and preparations remind me that there is no inferior cut. Many people, chefs and butchers alike, will attempt to minimize or denigrate a cut of meat or a category of animal, kind of referring or alluding to them as not being worthy of eating. And while it's important to understand this viewpoint and where this viewpoint comes from and how this viewpoint came to be, there's insight there that should be noticed. While it's important to notice this and understand this, it's equally important to understand that there are other situations and circumstances which would lead very intelligent people to come to a totally different set of conclusions on that same subject. And that's where meaningful cultural exchange can be of great value. If you've listened to previous episodes, you've heard me talk about how the eye of round muscle, I'll give a few examples of here what I'm talking about. The eye of round muscle is one example. It is prepared as a very important holiday dish at certain times of the year in Argentina. Whereas the eye of round doesn't receive very much attention in many butcher circles in North America. You've heard me talk about another example, the muscle known as rose meat, the muscle known as twitch meat or elephant ear. It has many names, but generally it's all grind in North America. It's barely noticed in North America, whereas it's a family favorite and receives great attention and appreciation in South America as the matambre. And the preparation, the elaborate preparation that comes with that meal. The examples of this kind of phenomenon in the world of food and cookery are extensive. Beef tenderloin is downplayed among certain populations and upplayed among other populations. The picanha muscle, another example. Picanha is the top sirloin cap, or the culotte is another name for it. It is a prized cut of beef in Brazil. It is the house cut at many Brazilian restaurants. And it can be cooked in a way that results in a life-changing eating experience. When I first went to a Brazilian steakhouse, my mind was blown when I had that first piece of picanha. While in other regions across the planet, you'll find a food culture that sees nothing but stew or grind when they look at the picanha. Trim off the fat cap, stew it, grind it, and they'll laugh at you if you suggest that it could be delicious. Mongolian culture gives us an example of a food culture that really puts more value and appreciation upon the internal organs of the animal, the internal organs. They have many elaborate, exciting, enthusiastic preparations for all the viscera and everything, all the guts and all the different organs. Whereas the meat on the bones is more thought of as a byproduct or a lesser sort of suitable for utilization in stews and soups kind of stuff. That would be the muscle on the bone there. It receives less enthusiasm. One thing that's for sure is that there are many different perspectives and conclusions that are possible. None of them wrong. They are all situationally correct. But they represent more of a partial truth. They represent only part of the story rather than a reflection of the whole story. There's always a history behind why certain cuts and preparations of those cuts rise to an elevated status within family and community groups. There's always a history. David has already outlined some of the history for us in his piece related to the brisket cut, beef brisket. Since the hindquarters of beef was not kosher, was considered not kosher in the Jewish tradition, it makes sense that a hearty, inexpensive cut from the forequarter, such as brisket, would become commonplace at large family gatherings during Passover. Eastern European Jews ate a lot of brisket traditionally and brought their recipes and their brisket cookery preferences with them during the Jewish diaspora and then into the many regions of the world where they then settled, including Texas. Jewish settlers found a strong cattle culture, beef culture, and a strong smoked meat culture thriving in Texas when they got there. And there was an exchange of ideas and customs that took place. Smoked brisket cookery was one of the outcomes. Smoking and dehydrating meat and fish was the method of cooking and preservation used by countless indigenous communities through the Americas. It was not new. There was thousands of years of this already present, of indigenous people in South America, Central America, North America, smoking their fish, smoking their meats, dehydrating meat and fish. In certain territories such as Texas and parts of Central America, the indigenous meat smoking customs were then adopted by waves of subsequent settlers. And these smoking traditions, once adopted, continued to flourish in those regions. Whereas in other regions, these customs fell by the wayside and were replaced by other settler-introduced cooking techniques. Hopefully David or Travis has already shared with you some recipes or recommendations for brisket smoking, hot smoking, cold smoking, temperatures, times, tools, and equipment. An appreciation for brisket and an enthusiasm for turning a hard-working muscle such as brisket into a delicious melt-in-your-mouth meal, I think is a marvelous thing. Brisket is the ultimate example of a tough cut that becomes tender through proper cooking technique. Wouldn't it be nice if every tough cut on the animal received this kind of attention and enthusiasm? The fact that brisket chefs have cracked the code on how to make brisket delicious gives light to the idea that there is no lesser cut on the animal. Every cut, when it receives the proper attention and enthusiasm, can be made into something worthy of being the centerpiece of our high holiday dinners.
That's going to do it for this week's episode of the Meat Block Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks for Ryan and David, as always, for your contribution to the Meat Block, being a part of it and being a part of this huge community. And we're about to do our 100th episode spectacular in about a month or whenever. So that's exciting. And to help us celebrate, I recommend you go back and start at episode 1 and listen to how awkward and unput together it was. Kind of like how it is now. Just joking. And after you listen to episode 1, listen to episode 2, 3, and so on and so forth, all the way until you get back to the end. It helps my numbers. Thanks. If you want to get a hold of us here at The Meat Block, you could email us at themeatblockpodcast@gmail.com. You could tweet us at themeatblockpod, even though no one does. And the best way to really get a hold of us is Instagram at The Meat Block. Also, we have a Facebook group, The Meat Block Podcast, and there is good conversation happening over there. Last week, I believe I said that I'm over Facebook, and I am personally, even though I post on there all the time. I just think it's a toxic environment, and I hear about people's political opinions that I went to junior high with, and I could truly give 2 fucks less about what they think. If you want to get a hold of Ryan, he is at Gather Break on Instagram. David is the Farm Butcher on Instagram, and I am at American Butcher on Instagram and Facebook. And until next time, keep your knife sharp and live in the margin.
The smell first hits me from 5 blocks away. It's Friday and I can't stay away. The Blue Jays are playing, but I won't likely risk it. I'm here with a plan to binge on her brisket. My mother's brisket, so moist and tender. I'll always sends me on another Shabbos bender. The onions and carrots look nice. I don't need them, and potatoes no dice. There are only two things that suffice: my mother and her brisket. My mother's brisket, so silky smooth. Whatever might happen all week, there's nothing quite like it to soothe. Don't need a Vorspice or any dessert. I got no room, my stomach already hurts. On Monday I'm altering shirts thanks to her brisket. I wanna climb into her brisket. I could cry, die at the thought of her brisket. I wanna swim in her gravy and thrillingly flailing I'll whisk it. The judges will give all the gold to my mother's brisket. My mother's brisket, strictly glad. The butchers revere her, reserving the very extraordinary best cut. Her picture's on the wall in between Schneerson and Yentl. Her brisket can even make flossing seem transcendental. Diving into her brisket, I spoon her soft, sweet brisket. And if I really get lucky tonight, though it's easy 'cause she loves to spoil, Shabbos candles will reflect their last light in blessed tin foil. I wanna climb into the tin foil. I can't wait to get home with my tin foil. I'm gonna run all the red lights, pull it over, stop it and frisk it. I want 25 years to life with my mother's brisket. Solitarily confined to every slice of my mother's brisket.
That, of course, was Rick Moranis. Moving, closing. Yeah, if you've caught on, this is the part of the show where I talk about pretty much whatever I feel like talking about. This is Travis, not the American Butcher. This is just Travis the guy. I'm gonna get down with you. I put my hat on backwards, and I'm sitting backwards in my chair, and I'm gonna bro out, be one of the teens, and tell you, like, you know what, that guy was me. This is Porsche postpartum show reflection. It's a play on words. I'm still working on the title. So Friday of this previous week, so today's Tuesday when this is released, so the previous Friday, the 28th, we closed on our house. I thought it was going to be one of those things because I was told that, like, you know, come in and you sign and then it's done. And thought it was going to be that easy, but it, like everything in life, it truly isn't easy. Sometimes it's just what it is. And when you have so much paperwork and so many moving parts and missed dates and things like that, and people wanting to make sure that you are responsible enough to get the money that you're asking for in multiple properties, and all this fun bullshit. It wasn't as quick as I was led to believe. I get into the office, and the first thing that morning, they said, we want you to come and sign in the morning, but you got to wait until we open at 8:00, which means I'm already going to be late to work because I have to wait until 8 to call them to see if they want me to come and sign. And so I do that. They say, all right, you got to come down here to Linwood, pick up these papers, then fax us all this, fill them out, then come back down here and give us the information. It's not something that you fill out there because you need routing numbers and all this shit. So we talked to our lender, and they said, oh, we actually have that information that the escrow company is talking to you, which is weird. I didn't know there was like an escrow company, then we have our lending company, then we have our real estate company. So there's 3 different companies that are all getting a VIG off of this purchase. And they all essentially want the same information. Are you responsible? Are you not a degenerate? Do you pay your debts, etc.? And so we got, our lending company ended us giving us the information so we could do a wire transfer. And it's a Friday too, so there's no leeway. So we filled all this out, did the wire transfer, and we go to the escrow company, and the first thing they say is like, I don't think that's going to happen today. You guys still are here to pick up your wire forms. And we're like, oh, our lending company gave us that information. And she says, well, she rolls her eyes so hard that I thought she was going to fall over, because she was explicit that we had to go there, pick it up, go back home, do all this stuff on our own computers, which are 25 miles away, then come back down there and then sign. So she was shocked when we shortened this transaction by an hour. And the first thing she says is, well, let's hope you filled it out right, or they gave you the right information. Otherwise, that money is gone. In the last week's episode, in this post-mortem session of the show, I was talking about the stress and the anxiety of selling a house. But now, for the first time, I'm like, I think I'm having an anxiety attack. I'm like panicking. This is awful and stressful, and it doesn't have to be. And she's just being a big see you next Tuesday for no reason. I'm like, gee willikers, guys, come on. So we're waiting there. I show that the money has been taken out of the account for the wire transfer, so it's pending. And my bank is very much like, if you do it before this time, it's guaranteed by the end of the day. And well, the end of the day for this company is for my bank is a normal business day, 5:00. But the escrow company needs it done by 3:00. But also the courthouse closes for the transfer of deed of trust by 1:30, because they close at 1:30 the last work week of the month. Who knew that? I know that now. That's weird. So we're sitting there in the waiting room, waiting for the documents to be drafted so we could sign, my wife and I. And our escrow officer comes out and says, there's a problem with, we can't reach your HR department. And it's a vague statement. It's like, are you talking to me or are you talking to my wife? And my wife's already texting our lender, who just said, oh, could you have Travis's HR department contact me because we need to do proof of employment. And our lender was very understanding. And this person was acting like we were smoking crack and just complete pieces of shit. Not that if you smoke crack, you're not a piece of shit, but I'm sure there's stand-up people who enjoy crack. I just wouldn't trust them with money. But so on one side, it's mall hills, and the other side is mountains. So I call my boss. He calls. It's taken care of now, our timeline where I was supposed to go in, about an hour and a half late to work. Right now it's pushing about 11 because we're waiting for this transfer. So the escrow officer goes to make sure everything's in order, runs off the deed of trust. We still haven't gotten the transfer, but I got the proof that the transfer is happening and the funds are missing from my account. But nothing can be done until this, and everything's stressful. And I'm now with the notary going and signing all this paperwork and signing all this shit. And the escrow officer is like, call your bank right now. Call them right now. And I call them and I'm on hold. And I can't express urgency to people who have like a system put in place. I'm saying like, I need the Fed ID number and I need this and I need this. And I'm like, well, we don't have that yet. And I'm like, well, then that means the transfer hasn't started because I need the federal ID number that will prove it started. I'm on hold with customer service, signing my shit and all this. And then I get another call from the wire transfer people at my bank with my Fed ID while I'm on hold with the people looking for my Fed ID. And by the skin of my teeth, somehow we made it work. And the escrow officer, who I viewed as a big see you next Tuesday, was actually on our side at the end because of how hard we were hustling and doing everything to get it right. And on our way home, we get a call saying there's something wrong with the deed of trust. And it bounced back and it looks like the house isn't going to close. This is at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon. And in my mind, I'm like, there's nothing they could do to make it close. This is fucking insane. We're organizing. I'm like, I can't go down and sign again anytime soon. I already kind of like fucked over everything with my work trying to make this happen today when I just thought I was going to be late. And now I've been in this office for 4 fucking hours and I missed a day of work. Luckily, my boss is understanding and understands life and shit like that. 20 minutes later, we get a call from our financer or a lender. They said somehow they made it work. They did a Chinese fire drill, which I don't know what that means in the real estate industry or the lending or escrow industry. But I just imagined everyone in the office getting out, running around the office and sitting in different people's desks. And congratulations, your house closed. Well, I hope you enjoyed these weird segments after the show. And if you don't, too bad. I'm going to keep doing them. Just talk about my personal life. And if this is something you enjoy, maybe I'll just do a Patreon or like my own private podcast where I just talk about situations that I have found myself in and just anti-mortem my week. Till next time, keep your knife sharp and live in the margin.